was trying to do something simple, a routine task. Nothing illegal, nothing suspicious. Just a man walking into a bank with a check he had earned through hard work. But the moment he handed it over, everything changed. The teller's eyes narrowed, her lips curled with disbelief. She didn't see a professional. She didn't see a man who had worked for every dollar on that slip of paper. She saw something else, someone else, and in a matter of seconds, his world turned hostile. The check was ripped in half before his eyes, dismissed as fake, as if his very identity was counterfeit too. Security shifted in the corner, hands close to their belts, eyes fixed on him like he was a threat. All around, whispers grew, and the weight of judgment pressed down like chains. But what they didn't know was this. In 10 minutes, the man they were humiliating would turn their world upside down. In 10 minutes, the same man they tried to strip of dignity would hold their futures in his hands. Because the truth they couldn't see was this: he wasn't powerless, and what he did next would shock everyone in that room. What happens when the person you try to break is the one who can decide your fate? Marcus was a man who carried himself with quiet confidence. On most days, he blended into the crowd, unnoticed in his neat suit and worn leather shoes. He lived a life of discipline. Early mornings, long hours, and a steady routine that left little room for chaos. To neighbors, he was just Marcus, the man who watered his plants every Sunday and waved politely on his way to work. To colleagues, he was reliable, competent, someone who handled problems with calm precision. His life was not glamorous, but it was stable. That day began like any other. Marcus had finished his shift, his mind running through the errands he needed to complete. Among them was depositing a check, a sizable one, a reflection of months of effort. To him, it was nothing extraordinary, just part of life's rhythm. He walked into the bank expecting efficiency, civility, perhaps even a small smile from the teller. Instead, he walked straight into the jaws of a storm he never asked for. The branch buzzed with ordinary noise. The hum of printers, the shuffle of feet, the faint clatter of coins being counted. Marcus waited for his turn, patient as always, rehearsing dinner plans in his head. He stepped forward when called, placed his check on the counter, and slid it toward the teller with the kind of casual trust built over years of banking. He didn't notice the pause, the skeptical tilt of her head. He didn't register the slight smirk tugging at her lips. Not yet. To Marcus, this was still an errand, still part of a day he thought he controlled. But there were signs. The guard near the door suddenly straightened. The woman at the counter 2 rows down who glanced over, then glanced again. The teller's hand that lingered on the check too long, as if touching it might stain her fingers. Marcus adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and waited. What he didn't know was that every second that passed was drawing him closer to a moment that would challenge not only his patience, but his very identity. The sound was sharp, deliberate, the sound of paper tearing. Marcus blinked in disbelief, his check split clean down the middle, its value dismissed in one cruel gesture. The teller's voice cut through the bank like a blade, accusing him of fraud without hesitation. Customers turned, eyes narrowing, curiosity hardening into judgment. He stood frozen, heat rising in his chest, as the humiliation wrapped itself around him like chains. The guard moved closer, one hand hovering above the weapon at his side, his other hand raised as if Marcus had already confessed to a crime. Whispers traveled quickly. Fake check. Trying to scam. Should have known. Marcus's pulse thundered in his ears. He tried to speak, but the weight of their suspicion drowned his voice before it could carry. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Each second twisted tighter, suffocating him under the weight of eyes that refused to see him as a man. He wasn't Marcus anymore. He wasn't a professional, a son, a neighbor, a friend. In their eyes, he was just a problem that needed to be contained. And then, the final insult, the call to the police. The teller's voice sharpened as she relayed her version of the story, each word stripping Marcus further of his dignity. He stood still, too aware of the danger pressing in on all sides, because he knew the truth. For men like him, a single wrong movement could turn suspicion into tragedy. He watched the clock above the counter, seconds ticking away, each one pushing him deeper into a nightmare. Customers recorded with their phones, their curiosity more valuable than their humanity. He could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe him. They didn't care. They only wanted the spectacle of a man unraveling under the weight of an accusation he could not fight. The question burned in his mind. Would he walk out of this bank alive? Or would this be the day his name was added to the endless list of headlines? Another story twisted before the truth ever surfaced. The room stayed tense until the officers finally arrived, their flashing lights painting the glass windows red and blue. Marcus's body stiffened, though he kept his face calm. He knew all too well what could happen in the next few seconds. The guard whispered something to the officers, pointing at Marcus as though presenting evidence. And yet Marcus stood silently, refusing to give them the satisfaction of panic. One officer asked for his ID. Marcus handed it over, steady hands hiding the storm inside him. The check stub with his company's name still sat in his pocket. Within minutes, the truth began to unravel. He was no fraud, no criminal. He was a legitimate client, with an income and position far higher than anyone in that branch expected. The officers glanced at one another, their tone softening as the facts became clear. And then came the twist, the kind no one in that room could have predicted. Marcus pulled out his phone, made a single call, and within moments, his voice carried the authority that no one else had granted him. "Yes, this is Marcus. I need you to handle something at your downtown branch." The silence in the room grew thick as realization set in. Marcus wasn't just a man trying to cash a check. He was an executive at the very institution where he had just been humiliated. The manager's face drained of color. The guard lowered his hand from his holster, suddenly aware of the weight of his actions. The customers who had recorded the entire ordeal gasped softly as whispers spread. The power dynamic flipped in an instant, but Marcus didn't shout. He didn't gloat. His voice carried something far heavier than anger. It carried disappointment. He looked around at every face and said, "This is the problem. You didn't see me. You only saw what you assumed I was, and you were ready to destroy me for it." That silence cut deeper than any argument, because in those words lies the truth that so many experience daily, that no matter your position, your income, your success, racism can strip you of humanity in seconds. The resolution came swiftly. The branch staff, who moments earlier had wielded power over him, now stood exposed. The higher-ups of the bank responded with immediate action. Firings, disciplinary reports, and a forced reckoning with their own systems followed. The people who once judged him would never forget the day they tried to humiliate a man who was, in fact, their superior. But for Marcus, the victory wasn't sweet. He walked out of that bank with the check finally deposited, but his dignity scarred. The pain lingered, because the truth was undeniable. If he hadn't been who he was, if he hadn't had that power behind his name, the ending might have been very different. It could have been another tragic headline, another life cut short over nothing more than an assumption. And that is the larger story, one that echoes far beyond Marcus. How many others walk into a bank, a store, a school, a workplace, and are judged not by their character, but by the color of their skin? How many never get the chance to prove who they are before the system silences them? Racism doesn't always come with sirens or violence. Sometimes it comes with a pen ripping through a check, with eyes narrowing in suspicion, with whispered accusations spoken loudly enough to wound, but quietly enough to deny. These everyday injustices, repeated over and over, create scars that millions carry silently. Marcus made it home that night, but not unchanged. His silence became a story too many know, but too few tell. His dignity was bruised, yet his resilience became a reminder. This wasn't just his story. It was the story of generations, a story that keeps repeating. And so the question lingers. How many more times will this happen before the world finally listens? How many more Maruks will be shamed, doubted, and threatened before society admits the truth? If this story moved you, don't just watch, act. Please share it. Speak about it, reflect on it, because change doesn't begin with silence. It begins when we refuse to look away.